Hello everyone. Now in this particular video we are going to discuss about the triggers. Okay, and we'll see one example using SQL that how we can implement the triggers. Okay, but first, what is trigger here? Let us discuss that. So here you can see a trigger in PostgreSQL is basically what? A database object that automatically executes a specific function in response to certain events on a table. So in short, what we can say about the triggers, a trigger will automatically execute a particular function when a certain event will happen. Now, what is this event here? What do you mean by this particular event? So whenever we are going to insert any row in a table, that is basically an event. Whenever we are going to update a row in a table, that is basically an event. Or for example, delete operation is an event. In such scenario, if we want to do some process or if we want to automate some particular task, for that purpose, we can write the function and we can call that particular function based on this particular event, right? So that is what trigger is. Now, why we use these triggers? So trigger is used to maintain data integrity, yes, enforce business rules based on our requirement and automate database actions. So we discuss each one of these in detail now. Okay. Now there are two types of triggers. First one is based on the event. Second one is based on the execution timing. Okay. So what is event we already discussed. So based on the event means what? So here you can see before trigger. So before occurring of any event, if you want to do some certain operations, for that purpose we can define a trigger, right? So executes before an operation, for example, insert, update or delete. Similarly, after trigger means what? After execution of a particular operation, if we want to automate some process, then we can call a function that is basically a trigger. For example, if I give an example for before trigger, let's say before inserting a particular row in a table, I want to check few conditions, few things, right? Now for that purpose, I can use the trigger. So based on my custom requirement, if I want to check few conditions for that particular row, I can define a before trigger, because before inserting this particular statement, we are going to call that particular function to check that particular criteria, right? So that is what a before trigger is. Now what about after trigger here? For example, we are updating any particular row, right? So once I update a particular row, I want to keep a track of the previous field or previous values. For that purpose, I can use after trigger, right? For example, I updated my own salary, right? But I want to keep a track of my previous salary, and if I want to store that in a separate table, for that I can use the after trigger, because what I am doing here, after updating that particular row, we are calling that particular function, right? So that is what after trigger is. And here we have one more thing, instead of. Now what do you understand by this instead of? Now we use this particular thing on views to replace the triggering event with user defined action. Okay. So in this particular video, we are going to discuss one example based on each of this, before trigger and after trigger. So this is about the trigger events. Now what about the execution timing? So there are two things, before happening of an event or after event, right? But there are two things about the execution timing, row level trigger and statement level trigger. So whenever we are going to update some record, so few rows are going to get updated, right? So it executes once per affected row. So for every row, we are going to call that particular function, or we can say trigger. That is basically a row level trigger. Now what about statement level trigger? For example, I am inserting one particular row. So we are dealing with a insert statement here. So it is going to execute only once, right? So if I want to call a function or a trigger based on some particular SQL statement, regardless of number of rows affected, for such case we can use statement level triggers. Okay, so please remember this two things: row level trigger and statement level trigger. Okay, very important thing in the concept of this particular trigger. Okay, now this is about the triggers, right? Now in the definition itself we have said that what is trigger? We are going to call a specific function, we are going to execute a specific function automatically based on a certain event. So we discuss about the event. Now let us discuss about the functions here, right? Because based on this event only we are going to call those functions. Now how we can define the function in SQL, like what we do in the case of a Python function, same thing is here as well. Okay, so here you can see about the function. So this is a SQL syntax for creating a function. So here you can see create function, then you can define a function name. So I have just given trigger underscore function underscore name, and here I have not passed any parameters, right? Now what this function is going to do? So it function is going to return a trigger because we are creating this function for a specific event or trigger. So that's why it is going to return a trigger. So this is how we can define that. And language is what? So PLPG so we are defining it here, and now here we are starting our function. So as, then we have to give this $2 symbol, then begin, and in between begin and end here our logic will be there. So here logic, or we can say use case, right? What we want to do, right? So our process. So here we are defining our logic or process in this particular thing. So begin, in between begin and end, and here we are closing that particular function by using this $$ symbol. Okay, so there are two things: either you can specify this language at the end also or before as statement also, both are fine. Okay, both are a correct syntax here, so don't get confused in syntax here. So this is how we can create one function. Now let's, for example, I have created this particular function for this particular process, right? Now how we can call this particular function automatically based on the event? For that we need to create a trigger. So here you can see how we can create a trigger, syntax for creating a trigger. So create trigger, then we have to give a name to that particular trigger, and here you can see, so we have to specify the event thing here. So before event or after event, right? So what is the event that we need to specify, and whether before or after, that we need to specify. Then we have on clause, and on which table I want to execute this particular trigger, that also we have to mention here. And then after that we have whether we are defining this for each row or for each statement, that is going to be here, and then we are going to call that particular procedure. So here you can see execute procedure and that particular function name. Okay, so here you can see whatever the function name we have defined for the trigger, we are specifying it here. So automatically whenever this event happen based on after or before, we are going to execute this particular procedure. It means we are going to execute this particular function automatically. Okay, so this is how we can create a trigger. Okay, I hope the syntax is clear. So this is about the function, this is about the triggers. Okay, I hope you understand the difference between function and trigger. So first we are going to create a function, and then we are going to call that particular function, or we are going to execute that particular procedure based on the event. Okay, I hope this thing is clear. Okay, now let's discuss one example. So first, before insert trigger. So we have one use case that ensure that no employee is inserted with the negative salary. Okay, so first we are trying with the before event here, right, like this. So we want to ensure that no employee is inserted with the negative salary. We can also define the check condition here along with the table, but let us create one trigger to raise some message whenever we are going to try to insert a negative salary. Okay, so here you can see first we are going to create an employee table. So we have ID, then it is a primary key, data type is serial, name, varchar, salary, numeric, right? So just simply we are creating this particular employee. So here you can see create table successfully. So we have created a table employee here. Now what we are going to do? We are going to call the function here. Okay, so same thing, create or replace. Suppose we are creating a new function, so it will automatically get created. Or if I want to replace the same function, then I can use a replace a thing here. So create or replace this particular function. So I have given the function name check salary before insert, right? Now what it's going to do? It is going to return the trigger as then we have $2 symbols here, then begin and end. In between begin and end, we are defining our process or logic, what we want to do. And here after that, we are defining the language, right? So what we discuss, we can specify it here as well, or we can specify at the end also. Both the things are fine. Okay. So now here you can see a logic here. If new dot salary is less than 0, whenever we are saying new means what? Whatever the row we are trying to insert, we are taking it as new. While updating, there will be two things. First one is the new one and second one is the old one, right? So if I want to deal with the old details, I am going to use old there. If I want to deal with the new things, then I am going to use new here. So if you observe in the case of our use case, we are defining for a before statement, so that will be a new. Okay. So for new dot salary, if it is less than 0, then what we need to do? Then we have to raise some exception. What is that? Salary cannot be negative. So this message will get displayed whenever we are trying to insert a salary less than 0. Okay. And then we are defining and if return that particular new value. So whatever the new value is there, we are going to return that if that condition is not satisfied. Okay. So this is how we can define the function here. Now let's try to execute this one. So here you can see we have created a function here, right? Now we need to call this particular function. So here you can see, create trigger before insert salary. So we have given the name before insert salary, and then we have event. So before insert, so we have defined the thing that before happening of which event, insert event on which table, on employees table. Now based on the execution part for each row, because we are dealing with the each row insert statement here, so that's why we have mentioned for each row. So execute the function. Now what we are going to execute? This particular function here, that is what we have defined earlier. Okay. Now let us try to execute this one. So we have successfully created the trigger. Okay. Now let's try to insert the value with the negative salary and let's see what happens. So here you can see that particular message, salary cannot be negative. Okay. So this is how we can define the trigger. So it's a simple use case like what we can do with the help of triggers, right? So it's a simple use case for a before insert trigger. So that's it. Whenever you want to create a trigger, so first you need to define a function. It means what you want to do, what you want to achieve, that you have to define, and then we are going to execute that particular function based on some event, and that we have to define it here. Okay, and then we are going to call the trigger. That's it. Okay, and then this particular thing will get triggered. Okay, I hope you understand this particular use case. Okay, now this is about the before event. Now what about the after event here? Let us discuss that also. So here we have one use case. Log deleted employees in a separate table before they are removed. For example, I am removing few rows from my particular table. Now I want to keep a track of that removed row, right? So how I can do that? I want to automatically keep a track of those rows, or I want to save those rows in a separate table. Okay, whatever the row we have deleted. So for that we can use a trigger here. So here you can see one example. So again we are creating one new table. So deleted employee. So I want to store those rows in this particular table. So employee ID, name, salary, then deleted at that particular timestamp. Okay. So whatever the timestamp we have, so it will take automatically based on this particular current timestamp. Based on this particular current timestamp. Okay. So let us try to execute this particular thing. So here we have created one table, deleted employees. Now we are defining one function here. So here you can see one function, log underscore employee deletion. So it is going to return trigger. And now what we are doing? So here you can see our process or logic. So insert into, so we are trying to, so we want to insert a row in this particular deleted employees table automatically. So we are using insert statement here, insert into that particular table, and then we are specifying the attribute values. And see here what we are doing. Here we are saying old.id. Old means what we are referring. We are referring to a row before update, before deletion, right? That is what old thing. If I want to compare the previous row and the updated row, in that case there will be two things, old and new. So I can compare by using that old and new thing as well. But here we are dealing with the old values because I want to store a separate table, right? So old.id, we have old.name and old.salary. So why we are defining old here, why we are using old here, because we are dealing with the removed row. Okay, that is basically a old values from that particular table. Okay, so I want to store this particular value in this particular table, so that's why we have given the insert statement here. Okay, and then we are closing the thing here, and language is plpg sql like this. Okay, now let us try to execute this one. Yes, so we have successfully create a function. Now what we need to do, we need to create a trigger. Let us try to do that. So here you can see create trigger. So we are creating one trigger after employee delete. So we are going to execute the function that we have defined earlier. So after delete, so here I have defining the event thing. So after, and what is the event? Delete on which table? On employees for each row. Yes. And what is we are going to do? We are going to execute the function what we have defined earlier. So we have to mention that function here. Okay, now let's try to execute this one. So we have successfully created a trigger here. So here we are deleting one row, delete from employees where id equals to 2. So I already added 3 rows. So I already inserted few rows in the employees table. Now let's try to remove that particular row. Okay, but before that, let us try to see what we have in this deleted employees table. So as of now it is empty. Here you can see. Now let's try to delete this particular row from the employees table. Let's see what happens. So if I try to delete the row where id equals to 2, so you can see we have executed, we have deleted one row. Okay, now if you see this employee table, what you are going to get, let's see employees table here. From is missing. Yeah, so here you can see we have only 2 rows with id 1 and 3. So here you can see we have just 2 rows with the id 1 and 3. Now what about this deleted employee table? Do we have inserted the row successfully? Yes. So here you can see that particular row got deleted from this employees table and automatically get inserted into a deleted employees table. And at what timestamp we have deleted that? That is specified here. So you can see this particular date and this particular time I have deleted that particular row. Okay. So in this way you can keep a track of when I have done the update, when I have done the delete on that particular table. Okay. So that we can automate by using the trigger. So I hope you understand what we have discussed in this particular video and the concept of trigger along with these two use cases. Okay. So that's it from my side. Thank you.